And we are up and running. This hangout is live and on air, and it is a beautiful spring evening, Saturday evening here in Chicago. I am about to have a dialogue with Lee Catalano, who is in Boston and enjoying the eruption of spring in the eastern seaboard. How are you this evening, Lee?
I'm very good. I'm sitting here in my boys' bedroom and with you and Ritza and whoever else comes in the room. And I just enjoyed a round of basketball, the first one of the season with my son out in the yard. So I'm doing great. Thank you.
Oh, that's wonderful. Now, my backyard is kind of a mud hole. Are you guys, do you have an actual area where you're not subject to mud and grass and that sort of thing? Or
Yeah, we do. We're very fortunate because Mr. Catalano has the yard loaded with his construction equipment and he paved a road right down the middle of the yard. So I said, I'm just going to roll with this and put a basketball hoop in, and it's perfect. We have a perfect spot.
excellent. Well, that's cool.
Yeah.
And so getting the boy out and stretching his legs and getting him to be a little more acute, as it were, as far as hand-eye coordination. This is a good thing.
Yeah, yeah. I have a daughter who's in AA, and we talk. She's been sober for 5 years now. We talk very openly about how, you know, learning how to live and really going within and being inspired about how our day is going to go is so important. And my son had some growing pains and has his little feet. He was the smallest kid in his class, grew to a size 12, and now he's the medium-sized kid in his class. And then he was in the hospital this winter for a stretch, and he's recovering from a surgery. So we're learning together after a long period of time, really I want him to know how to get direction and how to live and be active. And so, am I boring you already?
No, not at all. I do a lot of yawning for some reason. As soon as I start talking to people, and I have often noticed that it tends to be kind of a validation that everything I'm hearing is spot on and is accurate. It's like when I yawn, it's like a validity check of some sort. It's kind of odd.
So I was just saying, I want my son to know how to listen within and be more active and just embrace life because he has a lot of gifts to give, and I don't want him hiding his light under a bushel. So we're getting more and more physically active now that he can.
That's wonderful. And yeah, is he a water kid too? Does he like swimming and jumping
He does.
into?
He does. We go to Cape Cod, and there's a lot of sharks down there now, and unfortunately, he loves swimming. So yeah, he does. He is a swimmer.
Yeah, well, that's the Italian side of his family. You'd be swimming with the sharks. So anyway, well, going back to origins here, that sort of thing.
Okay,
Okay,
yeah, I can hear you again.
okay. Now the conditions when you were young. Um, did you grow up in an environment, in a family environment where you were kind of moving in the direction of the course already, or was the course more of a spontaneous thing that just happened in your life?
I grew up in a family where my father was a severe alcoholic and in the Navy, and my mother was a single mom who didn't have a lot of interest in raising children, so she wasn't around. And the environment that I grew up was a lot of sex, drugs, and rock and roll. My older sister modeling it for me, and I really learned the ins and outs of being unfaithful and a lot of manipulation. And I came from one of those tough environments. So no, my mother had actually been a Catholic nun. She came from an affluent family. Her father was vice president of Bank of Boston, Boston branch, and was very proud. And he was very loving and very kind, but Catholic and closed. And I think my mother had a lot of rebellion from her start. Her mother in the garden club, and her father was a banker. And she was divorced when we were really young, when I was 6, and she was out of there. I mean, there was food on the table and there was a roof over our heads, but she didn't want any of us to succeed, and no one really did. And when I say succeed, I am the strongest one of her 3 daughters, and I am the most independent of her. I got so when I was 43. And I had to listen to the voice within me, because anytime I ever got slightly ahead with anything, or I ever had an opportunity, she pulled the rug out from underneath me hard. And she just didn't want anybody to rise above her station in life. So and when I was a little kid, I was very plugged in and very naturally mystical, and I loved music, and I had a best friend, and we danced all through our lives together. And she passed away when we were 36, but we were always together. And I didn't start noticing what was going on with my family till I was about 40, because my mom was really good at what she was doing. And so I found A Course in Miracles when I was 28, in the middle of all of that.
Oh, wow. That's quite remarkable and very dramatic. Now, you also parallel, of course, with Joel Goldsmith's work as well as with the New Testament. Had you come across Joel's work earlier, or
No,
was it?
no. And I didn't mention either. I was a very bad drug addict. I started using drugs when I was about 11 years old. And I used drugs every day through my teenage years, through my 17th year. And something woke me up. I saw 60 Minutes or something. My parents were watching, and I stood there and watched, and they were murdering Colombian families of the judges who were trying to stop the drug trafficking in the street. And I had never made the connection that people were dying, so drugs could come into America. And I was done. Standing there, right there in my mother's living room, when I saw that on the TV, I was finished. And I remember I was very gregarious and precocious, and my friends were really shocked and tried to peer pressure me, but no one was going to peer pressure me to do anything. When I was finished, I was finished. And that becoming so straight hurdled me right into Shirley MacLaine, Wayne Dyer, and then I tripped into Marianne Williamson, and then the Course. And I was really excited and delighted about finding the teachings of Jesus.
Very nice. And you're very comfortable with the fact that the Course was dictated by Jesus. You see it as being a valid parallel to the things that Jesus did that were recorded in the Bible.
Well, when I found the Course, I was really excited, because I knew there were things missing in the Bible. I knew there were things missing in the New Testament. And I looked everywhere. I've been looking for Jesus since I was a little kid in the world. And I couldn't find anything. So I came across the Course when the text wasn't in print yet. And there were little underground pieces of the text floating around. And there was a piece in Boston, and someone saw how into it I was and actually gave me a section of that typed. It was like in a binder. You couldn't get the whole thing yet. And I would go home, and I couldn't wait for the kids to go to sleep so I could be alone with it in the middle of the night and read about Helen's dialogue with Jesus. I was just so psyched. That was my secret, because my friends were into it. We were into we would go. I was very straight. I would be designated to the VIP lounges. The nightclubs in Boston were still very fancy, so you wore designer clothes and heels, and everybody was dressed to the nines. And we drove in and around the city in a big black Mercedes Benz and the moonroof, and it was still like, I didn't come to it because I thought my life wasn't working. At the time, I really thought that I was clicking with oil, and so I came to it really as a communion with Jesus.
Very nice. And so then, as your life started to get agitated and you started to question things in your surroundings, did you find the course was kind of the leveling thing that brought you through what must have been a very tumultuous time in your life where you were having to deal with is this real or is this just hedonistic, ego driven craziness?
Well, I was at the center of a very big family, and I was the one who brought everybody together, and I had a lot of friends, and my life was very full, and I had children. And I remember coming home. I had been a student of the course by myself for 10 years. I didn't think anyone else would study it. I thought this is the dorkiest thing in the whole world, and I don't give a shit who's into it or not. I'm into it. And I kind of hid it from people. I really didn't know there were other students. And I remember at the time in the 1990s, the style was women my age would know this, little tiny flowered wallpaper and striped bedspreads. Everyone had them. And I remember coming home from work and I was in my heels and in a suit, and the floor was cold under my knees. And I was on my knees and I was talking to Jesus. And I said, with my elbows on my bedspread, you know, Lord, I'm down with everything you're telling me in A Course in Miracles. I'm with you. And you have to remember, consciousness has risen a lot. People didn't know what that course was saying. They didn't know what forgiveness was. There weren't dialogues about this. When I first went online, people were still pretty mixed up, the more visible people about the course. And that's how people started to get to know me pretty quickly 15 years ago, because I understood it. And because I had done 10 years alone with it. So I said, you know, I don't know. I'm talking to Jesus. I don't know what you mean about this slaughterhouse thing. I don't know if I can roll with you about that. And I had been a single mother for 9 years, and a hop, skip, and a jump later, I met Mr. Catalano. He came into my life. I had been proposed to between husbands, but I really didn't want to be married again. Getting divorced so young was devastating for me. I was into the course. But he came along and my children really responded to him. And he was, to me, I thought he was a protector. Everything I didn't really realize I was into. Is very capable, very creative, did construction, very big, very strong. So he was the picture of everything. You know, I had been a single mother with these little girls and in protective mode for so many years that the thought of having a really great dude come along who wanted to take care of us and be my friend and, you know, go through life with me was great. And I fell for him head over heels. He showed up at my door every Wednesday and every Saturday for a year. Every Wednesday, every Saturday, we went out and dressed to the nines and in his big Cadillac. And he was so gentlemanly and so kind. And he had 3 children whose mother had passed away. And I love kids. And to me, the more I was falling for him, I was like, 3 more kids that I don't have to get bingo. And we got married after we had been together for a year. And I went from being a single mother with 2 little kids, and I lived a modest life. You know, I worked and we had shoes and we had a summer vacation, but there wasn't a lot of extra. I wasn't wealthy. It was very middle range, but I lived in one of my parents' apartments and I had rent control. I was fortunate. And um, I I don't know why I'm saying. Oh, so when I met him, I didn't realize until after we were married, he was quite wealthy. And he didn't put that out as a draw, but he was very generous and very kind. I knew he had more money than I did, but I didn't know how wealthy he was. But in the meantime, I had family members and I had friends who were evaluating all of that and who were really pissed to see me. They were okay with me, like doing everything and being the ringleader and being fun and gregarious, as long as my station in life didn't switch. I do follow what I'm saying. So as in their estimation, my station in life went from middle class to upper middle class. There was viciousness and jealousy like you wouldn't believe. And I don't really care to go over it. I wrote about it in my book, but this marriage and subsequent divorce wiped out every single relationship I had in my life except for my children. And it was brutal. So I remembered I asked Jesus about it. And I don't believe that Jesus, that'd be pretty cruel for Jesus to have something like that happen. But it was shocking and devastating. It was really, really terrible. And I divorced him when I was pregnant. And that's how bad it was. And I'm telling you, there's no 39-year-old woman without a college degree who wants to be pregnant and divorcing. And I was extremely vulnerable and devastated. And I came out of that and I understood without a shadow of a doubt that this world is indeed a slaughterhouse.
So you had, in many ways, a very upscale and highly visible lifestyle for a brief period there with your husband. And then all of a sudden that started to go south. I've noticed that when you start to embrace A Course in Miracles, it has the capacity to illuminate not only your ego, but the presence of the ego in those around you. And it makes you aware of the fact that you're not functioning as you truly should be, and everybody else is operating on a level that doesn't make any sense at all. So is that what you started to encounter at that point?
I have to tell you, I really honestly, and I feel very dumb and naive for saying this, I didn't realize people thought the way they thought. I really didn't. And when actually, my parents are affluent. So when I was by myself with my children, I wasn't affluent. I was just middle class, not poor, not rich, right in the middle. And so my parents were affluent. And then I was with my kids perfectly happy. I wasn't searching for affluence. We had a contented, very sweet life. And then when my former husband was quite wealthy, but I didn't live that kind of lifestyle with him. He just happened to be really wealthy. And, I had 5 kids that once I married him that I was taking care of every day. And I took care of our house. And, that's not a life of affluence. A life of affluence is when you have help. And I was happy. So I just wanted to clear that up. Like he had a lot of money. My life didn't upgrade. It actually became a lot more difficult. So I don't know if I can hear you or not.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, good. And so I didn't realize, it was clear to me when people started getting very jealous and very mean when I was marrying him that I didn't think like other people. Because when I was a teenager and I was with my parents would leave. I had the place and I was the youngest to myself, plenty of money, plenty of food, big crib. And I would invite all my girlfriends over every weekend. My house was the house to be at. And I always felt like the more the merrier. I had a big car. My parents got me a car the minute I had my license. And every weekend I would pick my girlfriends up. Like it was a party wherever I was. And I really genuinely loved them. I mean, I loved them. I felt that way about them. Their happiness was literally mine. I was already living in that vibe. So fast forward when I was in this marriage with this man, and he was actually turning people against me behind my back. He wasn't loyal. I had never heard of such a thing. Somebody being married to somebody who was turning other people against them behind their back, it like blew my mind. So I saw really quickly, oh my God, like people really think like this. And I was very, very, very naive because of my inner world. And I'm telling you, everyone turned on me. And so that's what I learned. I learned that that I didn't think like most people. And yeah, and it hurt. It hurt a lot. I'm an extremely loyal. I don't know if that was my natural soul's identity. I don't think it's of the personality, because people's personalities really suck. So I think in that way, in that part, I'm my soul. I'm very, very loyal, and I love a lot. And I loved my husband. Oh my God. I wouldn't have married him if I didn't.
So it was a very rough awakening period there, and then all of a sudden, in the midst of divorce, your son arrives, and that must have been a very uh, dualistic experience too. You've got this wonderful new life in your world, and at the same time, you're the other partner that should be helping this child build a foundation is exiting your life. So
I was
that
shaken, and I couldn't bring I was laying down plans to leave, but I couldn't tell him about it because he would do things to make my life really difficult. So I was secretly planning on leaving. And the very last time we were intimate, I became pregnant. We couldn't get pregnant, and I had a miscarriage. Very last time we were intimate, I got pregnant. So he came to the hospital after my son was born, and I had an emergency C-section. I mean, everything went sideways. And he was in the hospital room with me, and I wanted to name my son Kevin because it's Irish, and we agreed on Vito Catalano, but that was so Sicilian. I wanted the Irish on the front. And he agreed, but when he was talking to his brother on the phone, and I was very peaceful. And I wouldn't take my pain meds because I had a daughter who was in the middle of a nervous breakdown because she was gay and coming out of the closet. So the shit had just hit the fan. So I'm in the hospital room with him, and he's on the phone with his brother, and he told his brother that the baby's name was Carlo. We had never talked about Carlo, and Carlo is a gangster name. And so I shut the hospital room door after he got off the phone, and I said, listen, if you ever tell anybody my son's name is Carlo again, we are going to have a problem. And that was the end of that. So it was a tough time. Yep.
That's quite amazing that your life is under assault from all directions, although it seems like that's not uncommon with the Course in Miracles people, that the Course tends to bring all these things up and into our vision and causes us to either become embittered and distance ourselves even further, or else surrender to allowing the process of forgiveness to really take over and fill up our life, fill up our consciousness. So were you in that space of being able to look at all these things and forgive people and forgive conditions?
I was frightened. I was really scared. I was being threatened. My son was being threatened, and it was really terrible. I was living through things that I didn't know people lived through. And I had started to be an active online in A Course in Miracles, and there weren't a lot of people online then, so people knew me, and I didn't realize people knew me. And I went to a big Course in Miracles function. It wasn't in Boston. It might have been in Connecticut. Someone gave me a ticket, and I was a brand new mother. And I remember my hair was like down to my elbows, and I hadn't been out of the house, and I was literally shaky. And when I walked into that thing, everybody knew who I was. And this is really hard to talk about because those Course in Miracles people, I didn't realize in that time how many people were listening to me and reading my stuff. And when I walked into a room of people, I had no idea who they were, and they all knew me and were like looking across the room, and it freaked me out. I felt afraid because if you caught me 10 years earlier, that was my thing. Let me wade in. I never had a shy moment in my life. And now I literally was on shaky knees. And my legs were literally shaking. I didn't know myself. And I felt so terrible that I had brought my son into such a vibe that, I started out wanting to have a child with this man because I wanted to have a child who had two parents and felt loved and safe and snuggled. And the reality of the situation was as bad could get. And so I spent a lot of years alone. I would go into these Course in Miracles things where people would know me, and I'd have groups or I'd have meetings at my house, and then I would just have to draw back. I needed more time in the quiet alone, and I was definitely surrendered, definitely. And now, for the very first time, in many years, I've been coming forward more lately. And when people hear me speak, they're kind of like, well, who are you? Where'd you come from? And Tony Ponticello really had that response to me. And I want to be able to keep moving forward and not feel that like that turtle that needs to draw back in again. Like, I think I said to you, I have a lot to say. I feel very, very close to God. And I wish that I had a congregation the size of an Astrodome and I could wear a burqa so I wouldn't have to take on some kind of identity because of it.
Yeah, that's very much a Course in Miracles kind of thing, is helping us to shed our identity so the truth can show through, and
Right.
I had an experience back in 1972, I believe it was, where I had a friend who, we a couple of years younger than me, and he was kind of attached to the things that I was doing and my looking around for peace in this world because I was in Vietnam and I came back from Vietnam and then I went through a cycle of trying to resolve all the chaos that I had experienced. And of course, John Lennon and then George Harrison, a lot of other people at that time were awakening, where they were really coming into full blossom. And this young friend of mine who was kind of looking to me for answers. I remember one day I was standing in the room and I looked across the room and he was standing there and there were half a dozen people in the same room. And I saw the face of Jesus on him. And it was very startling. And all of a sudden I realized he's bringing through that pure truth in this very second of the compassion and the love and the whole posture of Jesus. And that was a very startling and revealing experience in my life. So you're kind of talking about having that same thing where you're just allowing Jesus to completely engulf you. Is that correct?
Yeah, and when I read like the New Testament and I see Jesus' actual words or certain things he says in the Course, it automatically brings tears to my eyes. And it's always been that way for me. Like, I can't get enough of him, and I'm pissed off that he's not here. It's like, what the heck? And I know every other Course in Miracles student will say he is here. Well, no, I want him in the dream in a body with me. I want him to sit at the table with me, and I want to talk to him about life. And, I want to be an apostle. I want to hang there and I want to serve and I want to be obedient to God and I want to be devoted and I want to be taught directly by the master. I've always wanted it since I was 7. Like, I'm not in this to bring God into doing a fix-up job in my life. I really want to move up, the level of the world, 3rd dimension, into the 4th dimension with God. And I've been there. I had a 3-week experience before I met my former husband where I was up in the 4th dimension and my thinking mind had completely shut off for 3 weeks. And the kids got fed, my job, everything still got done, but I wasn't thinking anymore. And I knew that there was no one else having this experience. And I willed myself back down into the 3rd dimension. I had to actually work at it. And I won't be doing that again, because remember, back then I didn't believe the world was a slaughterhouse. And, now I do. And next time I go up into the 4th dimension in my mind, I won't be willing myself back down into the world.
Mm-hmm. But at the same time, this world does have to be transformed. So we do have our work to do in this world, as well as all the other dimensions. It's a thing where nobody gets left behind. So we're always involved in the process, not so much of rescue, but of illumination, of seeing past the illusion of who they are and recognizing the truth of who they are in every situation.
I remember when I was up in the 4th dimension, my mother was entertaining, and I always had a very gregarious personality. It was fun. People like me to be there when they're having people over. And I was so quiet and so peaceful when I was in the 4th dimension. And I remember my mother, she would stop and her head would kind of tip and she'd look at me like, "What's going on with you?" And I would see her looking at me and I would just smile. It was just a whole different reality. And now I don't really have relationships. I don't really have relationships, 3rd dimensional relationships. In my life, like, it's very God-centered. It's very focused on truth. We still listen to good tunes. We still dance. We still play basketball. But I'm not the chick that someone comes to talk to about their boyfriend or their problems or their woes, unless they're looking for a healing, unless they're looking for a treatment, then I'm their girl. But I don't, I'm not into the 3rd dimension conversation. It's all about the human condition, and the human condition sucks. So I'm always practicing forgiveness and looking beyond. And when people are speaking to me, they have no idea where my mind is at. And I go within and ask God for a thought. And then I get the thought and I'm with God no matter what they're saying to me.
Yeah, I can understand that approach 100%. In many ways, I feel like I parallel that myself. Now, you grew up in the Boston region, and the course came as a result of the teachings, in some ways, of a very powerful personality from Boston, and that would be Mary Baker Eddy. Did you have any experiences with Christian Science and Mary Baker Eddy's work before or during or after you encountered the course?
What's really interesting is Joel Goldsmith, who I'm really into too. I see a lot of parallels between Jesus and Joel, and I study them both every day. Helen started scribing A Course in Miracles just a couple of years after Joel passed away. And Joel Goldsmith speaks about Mary Baker Eddy, and I didn't have a big interest in Mary Baker Eddy, but I could feel her around me when Joel would be talking about her on his videos. And I'm psychic, and my daughter's really psychic, and we have a lot of visitations around here. Sometimes you can see things fly through videos when I'm on camera because we welcome it. And I didn't realize that Mary Baker Eddy is laid to rest. She has like a huge, beautiful monument just 10 minutes away from my house. And so we actually all go as a family. It's one of our favorite places. We'll go and sit on her monument and meditate or just hang out. It's so peaceful and beautiful. And sometimes I go in the car, even in the dead of the cold, cold winter. It's Mount Auburn Cemetery. It's a stunningly beautiful place. The artisans from the old tombstones and it's just a really incredible place. The chapels, and I'll go there and sit and commune with Mary Baker Eddy and ask her to teach me. So yes, I have an awareness about her because of Joel, and I feel that I have communed with her and him because of Joel has brought her to my mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was into her work before I discovered Joel. When I first got back from Vietnam, I was out in California for a while and discovered Paramahansa Yogananda. And Yogananda had fully embraced Jesus and, basically in some ways became the full embodiment of Jesus in the 1940s and 50s here in the United States. And he was a fellow that really captured my imagination and really propelled me forward on this quest to understand Jesus more. So I had these various different avenues that all were reconciled at one point. Now, how big a vision do you have of what the course can be compared to? Are you looking also at East Indian, Middle Eastern, various other disciplines and recognizing within them the same principles?
I don't negate it. I don't negate any of that stuff, but I'm not into it. And only things that have been brought directly in my mind by Jesus I've looked at, and it's only been for a moment. Since I came to A Course in Miracles, like for me to pick up Joel Goldsmith and start studying Joel, highly unusual. People here in Boston, and these are people that are much smarter than I am, would tell me that my knowledge of it was astute and all those kinds of things. But if anybody who spent every single day for many, many years studying something would begin to sound astute, but my goal wasn't to sound astute about it. Jesus was actually healing. And when I heard Joel and my head turned to hear him, he was actually healing. Was Yogananda actually healing? Were people healing in his presence?
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Okay, because there's a lot of people that are held up as mystics. And as far as I know, there's no one in the world that's known. It doesn't mean healing's not happening, who is a healer, a mystic. And I would really have liked to have been, and I can't get Jesus, right? So Joel passed away a couple of years after I was born. And I'm like, man, and it's come into my mind that there really haven't been many women. Yes, there was Mary Baker Eddy, but man, did they give her a bad time. So I don't know. I have no idea what my role is. Am I a healer? I've seen some healings, and I hate to say I'm a healer. And the first time I saw a healing go down, it was so delightful and so exciting that I said, you know what? I guarantee you Jesus marveled at healings as well, because he knew it wasn't him. And when it's not you and you see it go down, it's like, oh, you're just delighted and grateful in the perfection of God. Like, it's so different than taking credit for anything ever. And you and I were talking earlier about this concept of healing and stuff. Like, when it becomes really consistent and you get really good at it, Joel Goldsmith says you could raise the dead and nobody would believe you. And it's true. You could raise the dead and nobody would believe you. I've seen healings take place. I saw a healing take place, 2 of them, and at my Course in Miracles meeting today. And I didn't even want to take credit for anything because there was a lot of coughing going on. And I said, hey, can I ask you guys a favor? When anybody's speaking in here, if we could not empathize with the human condition, if we can hold our minds high and practice forgiveness and not believe in the human condition, whoever is holding their mind high in God will elevate the consciousness of all of us. So see, I wasn't saying it was going to be me. And then, healings could go down, because isn't that what we're all in this for in the first place? I'm saying to you, can't talk like this. You can be careful. And there had been people coughing and coughing. And by the time of that end of that meeting, the coughing had stopped. And when we stood up to all hold hands, there was no more coughing. And at the end of it, I hugged one of the women who had been coughing her brains off. And I said, did you notice that there was no coughing going on here in the prayer circle? She said to me, she looked at me so puzzled. And I thought, this woman's been coughing for a week. I saw her in church last week, but consciously unaware. And you know what, Chris? I just let it go. I let it go. You just let it go. And there's another important component about healing, and that's that a person has to believe. They have to believe. Like Jesus wasn't randomly going around and a woman touched his robe and he healed her and he said, thy faith has healed you. And when my son was in the hospital, I called him on the phone when I took a break and I said, son, do you believe in me? Because I know through the course, you have to believe in someone. If you're in a weakened state, you have to believe in the miracle worker in order to heal. And I said, do you believe in me, son? Do you believe in the things you've seen? Do you believe in me? And he said, yes. And I said, well, you need to believe in me now, son. You need to believe in everything I say to you. You have to go inside of yourself and start to get involved in this and wanting to get well. No one's going to come along and make you well. You have to want it and you have to believe in me. And he said, okay, mom, okay. And when I came back to the hospital, he had taken a shower for the first time in 2 weeks. And from there, he got a tread and started to just get better and better and better. So that's a really important component, is to have faith and to believe. Like there's the miracle worker, but there's also the person on the other end of it has to want it and has to believe, it's going to happen. And so I'm going to be quiet for a moment.
Well, that's exactly what the Course tells us, though, is that, in order for the individual to receive that principle of God that restores us, that heals us, we have to absolutely believe. So that's one of the foundations that we all operate on, is knowing that it's, again, that idea of selecting which voice you're going to listen to. Are you going to listen to the voice for God, or are you going to listen to the voice for the ego? And if you're stuck on the ego, then, you're going to have to work your way back up to that point where you can let go of the ego. And that's a pretty rough journey for most people.
Yeah, and I'm cognizant now, like the more and more time that goes by, and the more time I commune with the Lord through the writings, and then internally, is people back in the days of Jesus didn't like him. I think in the world, people who are religious and stuff have romantic notions of Jesus and what his life was all about. But just being around Jesus and him being so cleared out made people feel very guilty, because he wanted people like the Essenes. They shared everything. No one toiled. And he would say, he cut the 10 commandments down to love one another and love God. And people were inherently selfish and didn't want to hear that shit. Just like now, like, listen, I know you have a lot of anxiety. This is hypothetical. I know you have a lot of anxiety, but you're having an affair with your next door neighbor, and that's not seeing your brother as yourself, and you can't feel the laws of God, and you're not bad or awful or evil for doing that, but you're cutting your own self off from the love of God. And in the world, you're going to get a big this for saying stuff like that. And if you keep saying it, sooner or later, they're going to put you on a cross. And all of those apostles, except for one, all died very violent, terrible deaths. So when you're really speaking from the laws of God, from the truth, you're not going to be popular in this world, and that's the truth. And we were talking about, and I'm not going to name any names because I don't need to, but we were talking about earlier about people that we know in A Course in Miracles. And I know people who raise to heights of fame, and they take advantage of it, and they take advantage of others in sexual ways, in monetary ways, and they deal with terrible anxiety. And then they get on the mic and they talk from the intellect about the spiritual doctrine, and that's not helping anyone. So then you take a me who comes out and says, listen, every beneficent thought, every kindness everyone feels. Chris, if you or I never go any further with A Course in Miracles, every loving, kind thought that we ever have, every loving gesture that we give now is affecting everyone. So I know what you mean about we owe the world. You know, we're here to give to the world. But I'm that chick, I'm that one who's not popular because I tell it like it is. And I'm not popular because of that as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, and popularity, you know, we go back to the era of Jesus. A lot of people don't realize this, but there were a half a dozen other people by the name of Yeshua um, that were healers and were teaching in the Galilee and in Jerusalem and down in the Sinai even. And yet Jesus had found the truth. Jesus had established a higher level. But at the same time, from some of the accounts of that era, there were other people that were much more popular than Jesus who were running around and who, again, like I said, were using the name Yeshua, Joshua, and so it was a parallel even in his era, because he had his own following, his own community, and his community was very solid and stable. These other people were much more cultivating a kind of a paparazzi, in the moment, spontaneous collection or assemblage of whoever was available, and they became very popular, but then they faded again. So it's going to be interesting to see how the future unfolds as far as the course teachers and the ones that leave a legacy, like Joel Goldsmith has left us.
And I've been looking, Chris, to get behind that. If and when I ever run into somebody who's into it to that level, I've never met anybody like me in Course in Miracles community, and that's the truth. And I search for that person. And it's really interesting. There's a woman actually who's pretty visible, and you would know who she was if I said her name. And her study and the things she wrote were just so deep. They were really on another level, and I could see it. And I had told you before, I believe that a Course in Miracles is ultimately a communication for one person whose mind is going to lift like Jesus and pull the rest of us up. And I thought this woman might be the one. And I made a donation, and I really dug her. I didn't really follow her teachings because I'm good, but I saw what she was doing. And now she started an organization and is asking for a lot of donations and building, because she wants to build big websites and heal the world. And it's taken a turn in another direction, and I'm disappointed. I'm disappointed because I've been looking for the Savior my entire life, and I'll know it. I'll know it when I see it.
Mm-hmm.
I sound
I can totally relate, but so now as far as your expectations, I guess, or anticipation of the next stage of your life, your son's going to be around for a few more years as a major theme in your life, and then he's going to be moving on with his own adventures. Where do you see yourself going as you're continuing to evolve forward in space-time here?
I have no idea. I have no idea.
Mm-hmm. So you're not setting any rigid ideas into place around what fate has for you, other than just awakening completely and totally.
Yeah, I really wasn't, in all honesty, given the where I came from as a child, a lot of neglect and a crazy childhood. And then, of course, I was drawn to some crazy marriages. And my life is really, I have a different life now. And it's very peaceful and very beautiful. And I'm super blessed. And I don't have a desire for anything to be any different than it is, yet I'm open to going wherever God would have me go. And yeah, so I don't really have ideas like that. Like I said to you, you know, I can speak the word of the Lord and sitting in a chair calmly, like talking to you. This isn't really my style. And I do videos and I'm sitting in a chair and I'm very civilized talking, but I'm when I'm speaking the word of the Lord, I'm very animated and very passionate about it. And I get past the microphone when people get shy. Like I don't need any preparation. And I would like to be like in an Astrodome and speak the word of the Lord and just toss me the mic and let's go. But it's not about me. Like I'd be willing to be, no one's ever going to know that's you, Lead Catalano. And I'd be like, hey, I'm cool with that. So that's, you know, the ultimate, yeah, that. And it's in me, it's within me. And you know, I haven't been asked to speak at the conference that's coming to Boston. And who knows? You never know. And I was actually, James Twyman was filming his movie in Boston on my friend's front lawn under the tents. And I didn't even know he was making a movie. And Lisa Natoli was on the video. And I know it had a lot to do with Lisa Natoli getting to be known. And the people were falling asleep. And I showed up late and Vicky said to me, oh, will you please talk? And I'm like, revival? Are you sure this isn't a nap? Because I have a good sense of humor and I had a chuckle. And she goes, oh, will you talk? And I said, sure. Yeah, I'll talk. And I said to James Twyman, I'll talk if you want me to. And he goes, okay. So Lisa Natoli finished and then she handed me the mic. I didn't know she was going to, but hey, great. I could feel God move through me so powerfully and people started sitting up and laughing. And I said a couple of swear words and they laughed even harder. But I didn't know there was a movie being filmed. And my son, I remember he walked around the house and he was staring at me because he had never seen me speak like that. And I was very disappointed that James Twyman had taken me, he edited me out of his movie because it was so fun. And people contacted me for like 3 weeks after that and thanked me for speaking. And it wasn't like, you know, I wanted people to hear. I wanted them to hear the good news. And then I said, okay, that's all right. My avenue isn't through a James Twyman and it isn't through it and it's not getting the support of, I have the support of God. And if God wants me here in my meditation chair, shooting hoops with my son, I'm down. And if God wants me in an Astrodome in a burqa or with a big smile on my face, I'm down with that too. So that's where I'm at with all that.
Very cool. So hopefully we'll be seeing you bouncing around the internet more and more as we advance into this next stage of the Earth awakening. And there is an event happening here. People they're not always willing to look at it or acknowledge it or even support it. But I think that all of us are in that final stage. It is going to happen. It's going to happen in the twinkling of an eye, as some of the sages from the past said. So anyway.
Are you talking about the 1,000 years of peace on earth?
Well, yeah, kind of. I think that that's a very limited concept. I think that God thinks in much bigger, with a much broader vision. But
right.
Yes, you know, so the rapture and all these things, you know, nobody's going to be left behind. It's just that it happens on a space-time continuum. So when Jesus or when the apostles were talking about, you know, there should be one on the roof and one will be taken, the other left behind. Well, it doesn't mean the other one's condemned. It just means that the other one's going to have to do their own work so that they're ready to be taken. And that's the way it works. But so if people want to get in touch with you, where are you most available and most visible?
I have a Facebook page and it's called The Experience, Course in Miracles, Joel Goldsmith and the New Testament. And I've even published books, but I don't read out of them or do any of that on my Facebook page in the group, because I really want it to stay. If I start doing that, other people will. And I want to keep the focus on the teachings of Jesus, of the Master. And I also have a YouTube channel called The Experience with Lee Catalano.
Very nice. Well, as we get the word out there, hopefully people will start checking that out and nosing around and discovering, the presence that you bring through in your own unique way. So any final thoughts that you'd like to share with us before we wrap it up here?
Yeah, I'd like to tell you thank you. It was really fun chatting with you and getting to know you today. And thank you for inviting me to come here and have a talk with you. It was a lot of fun. Thank you so much.
Oh, absolutely. I thought it was delightful myself. And, down the road, I'm sure that we'll connect for some other collaborations, whether in video or physical form. But undoubtedly, both of us are on the same lily pad at the same time. It's kind of a rarity in this world.
Yeah, it's true. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Lee, and you have a fabulous rest of the weekend, and I look forward to chatting with you soon.
Thank you. Good night, and God bless you.
Good night.